Not if you tied my penis to the back of a bus and dragged me to the jungle would I ever go into such a dreadful, ghastly, unedifying of a show. Welcome to this week's edition of One to One with Simon Jordan. As always, don't forget to keep liking and subscribing, and of course, leaving those questions in the comment section below. But let's get into this week's show. What did I make to it, to Gary Neville and Ian Hislop and people like that, taking the mickey out of Neville? First of all, I thought it was very brave of him to go and do a show like that, because you're taking yourself out of a very comfort environment where you are, where you perceive you've got the zeitgeist, and you have a big platform, and you're in an environment where Sky tell you how wonderful you are and that your opinions are all right, and you're going into a mainstream environment where societal observations are made. He got, I suppose, what he deserved, because it's one thing, like myself and Jim are going to Qatar, and people saying that's hypocrisy too. Well, it's not, because I haven't called out the Qataris for their human rights issues and their attitude towards LGBT groups. I've actually said the exact opposite. I've said that besides the human rights atrocities, which of course, in terms of the migrants and the workers' rights over there and the tragedies of workers losing their lives building stadiums, which of course everyone would call out, I've actually said, who are we in the West to go over there and lecture people about the development of their religious beliefs and how they get to the point where they are more civilized in their approach to all persuasions and incarnations and all sexual orientations. So with that in mind, I kind of feel that Gary got what he deserved, because he's preached a position and he's going to work for BeIN, which is obviously the state broadcaster or the Qatari-owned broadcaster. So on one hand, I admire him for having the courage to go into a different form of broadcasting and go into the lion's den where, you know, it's a little bit of a bunch of hyenas in there, a bunch of smart asses, and I wonder if you shone a light on Ian Hislop, how many times it'd be hypocrisy in his environment. But they were right to call him out. He should have seen it coming. He thought he was going to be able to get away with his usual nonsense of being able to bluster through, and he got eviscerated. He took it in good humour, and I know that a lot of people are ridiculing it, but I actually have a degree of admiration for him going to do it. I think he could have perhaps prepared himself for what was coming, but then again, if you make these hypocritical positions of lecturing people, and that's what's going on, people are lecturing people and people are preaching, and then you go and take their reals. You know, on one hand, I'll be fascinated to see Gary Neville go over to Qatar and tell Nasser Al-Khelaifi about migrants' rights on one hand while taking his reals on the other, and then go and lecture Nasser Al-Qatar about how he sees LGBT vantage points. None of that will go on. So he got called out for his hypocrisy. But I have a balanced view on it. I think it's brave to go into a different environment. It's brave to put yourself amongst a pack of hyenas. That sole function in life is to parody and ridicule any inconsistencies that you may have. But it's highlighting the hypocrisy of people thinking they're in a football world, thinking they're bulletproof, going into the mainstream and pow, getting it. So a bit of both. My favourites for the top four are Manchester City, Arsenal, Liverpool, because I think they will regain their poise. I think I'm going to lose £1,000 to Jim White on a top six bet, and I might even lose it on the basis that Newcastle finish fourth, although I think there is a very big divide between pre-World Cup and post-World Cup, and it'll be very difficult for certain teams to keep their momentum, but right now they are irresistible. So I think it will be Man City, Arsenal, Liverpool and Tottenham. I just think Tottenham, the reasons why I picked Tottenham is the Conte factor. He got them into the top four last year. I don't think Conte is going to look for a regression. Now, I believe that Tottenham will win something with Conte. I think they might nick something this season, because I've talked about a bauble this season, a pot this season. I don't think a pot is finishing fourth, but I think if Tottenham don't finish fourth or in the top four, it'll be a step back, and Conte's all about taking step forwards. So I think it will be Tottenham for that reason, because of the Conte factor. Depends what business. I mean, I am always against the idea that you buy players in January because you want to kick on. Very rarely does that happen. Yes, I know there's notable exceptions. Virgil van Dijk, Luis Suarez are exceptions that don't always prove a rule. Virgil van Dijk was attempted to be signed in the summer, and because of the situation where there was this tapping up scenario or player breaching the obligations that he had by talking to a club, even though he was under contract with the club and hadn't been given permission, kicked that transfer back into the long grass. Tottenham have spent £150 million in the summer. They spent £50 million in the last January transfer window. So I think Tottenham are good enough to get into the top four with what they got. But if Conte feels that they've got targets and Conte feels that there's a logical reason behind buying in January, then I suspect Tottenham will back him to a degree. It's not just about Daniel Levy, it's about Joe Lewis, and it's about how Tottenham view the future. But you don't get a Rolls Royce in the garage and fill it up with Derv. And so if Conte wants players in January, I suspect he'll get them. Yes, Ben White, Arsenal, if you look at Arsenal en masse, it's incredibly difficult not to be very much impressed with what they're doing. Ben White is a very, very capable centre-half, playing very well for Arsenal. He's a very elegant player in terms of he can play as well as he can defend. Yeah, there's an argument. Maguire's going to get in the England side, whether we like it or we don't, whether we feel that he's not merited his place, he's going to get there. If they're going to bring Conor Cody over him, then yeah, I can understand why there'd be some pushback to it. I mean, I think ultimately Southgate has already made his mind up, and I hope that Ben White is in that squad because I think he's good enough. And I don't think it's a case of giving up because one person sees it a different way to you. Ultimately, you'll see in a tournament how these players perform. It is true and fair to say, put aside Conor Cody, it's true and fair to say that very rarely has Harry Maguire let England down. And this campaign, this witch hunt for him, I think is a little unfair. I'm not an admirer of his. I don't think he's the greatest central defender we've ever produced. I don't think he's worth 80 million quid, but he didn't put that price tag on his head. And I also think when he talks to the media, he's so structured and formulaic that it doesn't make you feel that you're dealing with someone with any authenticity. But going back to the point, he's performed well in tournaments, and Southgate will want to bring a tournament team which he knows he can rely on. Now, whether he thinks Ben White falls into that category, because Ben White's a little bit like Southgate in terms of a player. He's not particularly overstated. He's very efficient in what he does, and he can play football, which Gareth could certainly do. Obviously, I watched him for many a year when he was at Palace before he was sold to Villa, and I know that he can play football, not just defend. So it's an interesting one, but I would have Ben White in over Conor Cody, definitely. Well, there's a media campaign for James Maddison, and it's gaining and garnering a lot of momentum. And of course, that campaign is based upon the fact that he's playing very well. I talked to Graeme Souness on the show that I do with Jim White, who raves about him. I talked to Danny Murphy, who's been raving about him for some time. And if you look at him at this moment in time, he's in an incredibly rich vein of form. I think he's matured as a player from any of the transgressions that may have created a division between the player on the field and the trustworthiness of moments in time where perhaps Gareth Southgate has felt slightly disillusioned with some of the outlook that James Maddison may have had in the past. On current form, it's very difficult on the domestic form that he's exhibited to suggest he shouldn't be included. Now, of course, all of these people that are championing his inclusion will know, far better than I will, that there's a difference between being a domestically effective player and being an internationally effective player because of the opposition and setup of international football and the fact that you're not playing in a team that's as cohesive as your colleagues on a day-to-day basis in domestic football. But you can only select people on the basis of what their domestic form is. And if Southgate is to be held to his word, then he picks players on form. And on form, it is very difficult to make a case, if you wanted to make one, and I most certainly do not, that James Maddison shouldn't be included in the side because I think he's a match winner. I think he's in such a rich vein of form that picking him for this World Cup as almost, not a wild card pick, but almost a last ditch pick would almost inspire the boy to think that he can overcome anything. And I think it would be a strange little formula that might have a wonderful outcome. So I think it will be very poor form if James Maddison isn't in the 26-man squad, because it's very difficult to find a place and space for anyone that's doing better than he currently is in that position. Not if you tied my penis to the back of a bus and dragged me to the jungle would I ever go into such a dreadful, ghastly, unedifying of a show. I've had my friends go in there and I've been perplexed. I've dated a girl that went in there. I've never understood why anyone would want to sit around in the most mundane of circumstances, chatting the most irreverent drivel for the purpose of other people's delectation whilst munching down on a set of kangaroos knackers. I have been approached. I was approached in 2011 and I think I used the exact same analogy, except I used a far more base word than penis. So absolutely not. Not while I've got a hole in my backside, given the terminologies that are being used and the things that are being eaten in the jungle, probably apt, would you ever get me in there. And besides that, given the fact that I upset most fan bases on a regular basis, I could imagine I'd probably get more bush tucker trials than that ghastly little twit, Matt Hancock. So no thank you, but thank you for asking. Right, that's it for this week's edition of One to One with Simon Jordan. Let me know your views on Gary Neville's hypocrisy, not full stop, just on Qatar. Who's going to make it into the top 4, and of course the form of James Maddison and his selection for England. Keep leaving your questions in the comment section below. Keep liking and subscribing, and I look forward to seeing you next week.